Mike McCool here in the Royal Examiner Studios. With me this morning is Maureen Diaz. Maureen is I call her a nutrient activist, but she's an educator with the Weston A Price Foundation, and which is primarily a nutrient-dense
Our whole mission
program
is to go back to teach people about the importance of nutrient-dense diets and going back to old ways, food ways.
Let's talk about what is a nutrient-dense diet.
Well, that's a phrase that's commonly used now, and it's a phrase that we actually coined. A nutrient-dense diet is one that contains all of the nutrients that should be in the foods that we're eating, but are commonly removed now in processing.
Processing, right. I read a lot about, you think you're getting something wholesome, and they've bleached it and pressed it and squeezed it and got rid of a little bit of everything that that was the good stuff.
And in its place is left calories and chemicals.
Yeah, well, I know about calories, so we can.
Yep, I do too.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is one of my things. You're looking at children and how they've evolved in just our generation or two, and especially I know Maureen and her children. I mean, they're 7 feet tall, very tall, and I blame. Of course, I can't blame it on your kids because they don't eat McDonald's, But I say it's the hormones in our food and the chemicals in our food that are changing the height and shoe size of children today. I mean, when I grew up, if you had a size 10, you had gigantic feet. And now they're wearing 12, 13, 15s, and they're only 12 years old. So I don't know what causes all that. The opposite.
Some of them are the opposite, just because they're not able to absorb nutrients if they're even getting them. But you're right about hormones in food, because there are hormones added to the production of
almost everything.
Meat. Yeah. And so, yes, it does have an adverse effect, not just in how tall people are, but it actually, because height is, the Maasai people that Dr. Price studied were 7 feet tall, after all, and they were very healthy.
Right.
But, what's interesting to me, Mike, is when I remember all of the people that I grew up around back in the 60s and 70s,
right.
I think I knew one person with cancer.
Right.
Hardly anybody had heart attacks. Diabetes
was
becoming common, but kids were still born healthy and grew up to be healthy, and adults mostly died of old age.
Old age, right.
But what's happening today?
Right.
Not only are people dying younger and harder, you can look at the lifespan. Yes, today people are living longer, although that is definitely changing in the last 10 years. But people are not just dying. They are dying miserable deaths. They're dying of cancer. They're dying of Alzheimer's and dementia. They're dying of complications from diabetes and a whole host of other diseases that you can remember, I'm sure. We did not have that when we were kids.
Right. Well, some blame that on, just because we haven't been able to identify them. But I really believe that could be some of it. But at the same time, there is you can't deny that we see these things that are happening.
Yeah.
And we know our whole culture has changed into a fast food diet. Mm-hmm. Who cooks at home anymore?
And if they do, it's convenient.
It's in the microwave or it's something else. I did, like you say, you go to it, no matter, even during the Depression time of 2008, 9, 10, whenever we had things were a little slow, the only business that was doing well are restaurants.
And they were the fast food restaurants.
We don't give up eating out. So I think that's, like you said, it's not. I can remember growing up, you had dinner with your family at night, and there was that was the norm, not the exception.
Yes, and at my house growing up, that was definitely the case. However, my mother was serving hamburger helper and tuna helper and turkey burgers in the microwave. Right. We were starting to have some issues, and she had serious health problems. Right. She was asthmatic, allergies, blood clotting. She was hospitalized several times for a variety of things. She was sick.
Yeah.
And then she changed her diet and removed almost all of the processed foods from our diet. She still wasn't feeding us the way that I feed my family. But her health changed completely.
Right.
And that example stuck with me, so that when I was a young mom and a young wife, I knew intuitively that I needed to do better and do differently. I didn't know all that I know now, of course, and it was before the internet.
Right, right.
So I sought out...
So you found the Weston A. Price Foundation.
Eventually I did. I was seeking for a long time, and finally at a conference, I used to sell my goat milk soaps and things
Sure.
at an exhibit so that I could go to a conference that would be health natured. And I heard a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Ron Schmid, speaking on the research of Dr. Weston A. Price. He was speaking specifically about raw milk, but more broadly about Dr. Price's research and light bulbs. It was an epiphany. Everything that I had been looking for, and I'd gone a variety of paths. We have so many different dietary dogmas today.
Right.
Well, and I had certainly fallen into some of those. But suddenly everything actually made sense for the first time, total sense. And this is both science-based and it's history. When we look back through human history, as Dr. Price did, we find that people who are eating their natural diets. Dr. Price was a dentist who in the 1920s, he made the connection between his patients' declining dental health with their declining physical health, and that all corresponded to the changes in the food system. So that's nearly 100 years ago. And you know that in the last 50, 60, 70 years, it has changed dramatically since then. But at that time, people were abandoning their traditional diets, and they were starting to eat things like jams and jellies and white bread and canned vegetables instead of fresh, and a wide variety of changes that were new to the diet at that time. And what he saw was that if he visited people, he went to every continent, of course not Antarctica because no one could live there, but every continent, many countries. He started in Switzerland, he went all over Africa, the Polynesian Islands, Florida, Alaska, Canada.
Yeah, Florida is its own country sometimes.
Yeah. Well, at that time, the Seminole Indians were still living there, so he studied them. And he found that as long as people were eating their traditional diets, they were vibrantly healthy, but as soon as they wandered to the next village or a store came in selling modern foods, their teeth, first of all, began to decay, and then their overall health was declining, but as soon as they produced the next generation, there were dramatic changes. Now those changes are far more dramatic. Now we have processed vegetable oils. We eat highly processed grains that are genetically modified and very heavily sprayed with chemicals that we know cause cancer. For instance, Monsanto is embroiled, now owned by Bayer, and I think they're regretting their decision to buy Monsanto because they're embroiled in lawsuits now where the plaintiffs are winning because it is very clear that chemicals in our food are causing cancers. So looking at Dr. Price's research, we need to go back. Now, he found some common denominators. We don't ever say that there's one diet for every person, but Dr. Price also found the same. The diets varied greatly all over the world. However, every culture revered animal foods to greater or lesser degrees. Every culture revered animal foods. Now, in the Polynesian Islands, people who were of childbearing age and preparing for marriage, they had sacred foods like lobster and clams and crabs that were very mineral rich, as well as fat rich, which carries the minerals into our cells. In Alaska, of course, they're eating mostly seal and whale blubber. Very, very little input of any kind of vegetables, wild berries, a little bit of this or that. But in Africa, he studied 3 separate populations which had varied diets. The Maasai, of course, were mostly consuming animal foods, including the blood of their animals. They'd bleed an animal every day and they'd share it. And also the milk from those animals and the meats. And they also ate some grains, which were prepared differently than we do now, grown and prepared differently than we commonly do now. But he also visited a population that was the total opposite of the Maasai. we would call them pygmies, I believe now. They were very short in stature but vibrantly healthy, and their diet consisted mostly of vegetables and grains. But they also consumed and valued insects and small rodents and the occasional small deer. So they knew that they had to have the animal foods. Now we hear all this stuff about veganism.
Right.
You know, that's and the plant-based diet to save the world, and it's a bunch of hogwash. There are very serious flaws, for instance, in the China study that people oftentimes uphold as see, this is the proof. We don't need animal foods. The China study, T. Colin Campbell completely ignored and buried some of his research, which showed that traditional diets in China consumed or contained animal foods such as pork and shellfish and rodents. Those were important parts of the diet, and those people were very, very healthy. So when you're looking at all the different research today, people usually have an agenda. Certainly he did when he wrote the China study. That study has been debunked multiple times by people like Dr. Chris Masterjohn and Denise Minger. They and others have written some really excellent critiques. It's important to understand that without the animal foods in particular, we're not talking a steak, but the organs and the fats of the animals are the most nutritious parts of the animals. And just as an example, we're always told we need vitamin A, and we do. We need a lot of vitamin A. Infants or babies within the womb especially need vitamin A to form the symmetry, okay? So that all of the structure of the body forms properly and symmetrically.
And I know that's a big thing in our country. We push that prenatal care.
Yeah.
Because they know that people don't, and the first thing they give you is a bottle of vitamins because they know people don't get it in the food.
And unfortunately, those vitamins are not as absorbable as getting from the food. You can absorb a small amount. A lot of those vitamins are fake vitamins anyway, synthesized in a lab. We need to get our vitamins from food. Vitamin A does not come from a carrot. I'm here to say that. Vitamin A does not come from a carrot.
I read a story about carrots. That was a propaganda thing that they used during the war to think that the British had good eyesight or something, and the Germans were. I read some useless information about that, but that was a propaganda scheme. Yeah.
Well, people believe that.
Yep.
I'm sure you've heard that and probably believed it. I used to believe that. But in fact, carrots, no vegetable at all contains vitamin A. There isn't a single vegetable you can consume that contains that very critical nutrient. Nor do any vegetables contain vitamin D, and it's difficult for our bodies to produce and synthesize vitamin D. What is in vegetables, especially the colorful vegetables, are carotenoids, beta-carotene in carrots. Our bodies, depending on our age and our status of health, as well as what else we're consuming with that carrot, that determines how much our gut can convert beta-carotene into true vitamin A. It's very difficult for us to do. A young, healthy person can do it. You and I, we are inhibited.
We're old.
We're old. We're really old. He's older than me.
Old. What's that about, that you can, if you eat too much of certain things, they turn their skin orange. Remember that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And actually, I have
a big diet,
heard of
these
that.
diet frame, these diets. That reminds me, we're every week a new diet comes out.
Yes.
And we're all trying to, find that magic pill or this magic diet that's going to correct our life problems that we've had. And really it goes back to, we really, God's given us what we need to survive.
Exactly.
And we just need to go back and do that. One thing I thought was interesting, and you mentioned Dr. Price was a dentist, and of course I go to several of these dental conferences with Dr. Zunka here in town.
Yeah,
and
he's a Weston A. Price doctor.
Yes, he's a holistic dentist, and you're right about one thing I noticed on your website, that these diets were the reference to their straight teeth. And if you notice that even today when you look at Eskimos and certain tribes in Africa and the Polynesians, they all have good teeth.
They have very good teeth, and it's not just that they're straight, it's that their dental arches are wide.
Right.
that is important because when your dental arch is crowded, it doesn't just mean crooked teeth. It means that the organs within your head, especially in the central part of your head, are cramped and can't function properly. You can't breathe properly. It means that you don't grow properly and your health is compromised overall. But what he saw in the teeth also reflected it was the overall skeletal structure. Well, now we have a lot of infertility and we have a lot of birthing problems. And that's due to lack of nutrients in the diet, so that women are not able to produce healthy children a lot of the time, and they're not able to birth healthy children because our skeletal structure is narrowed and compromised. It starts in the face.
Right.
That's where it's most evident. But it's the overall structure. And let me just mention quickly that with the vegan diet, I like to tell people, and this is totally true, babies are not vegan. Whether they're in the mother's body or they've been born, infants are not vegan. Growing bodies require certain nutrients like vitamin A, but many other nutrients that are not available from vegetables. And if the mother doesn't put it into her own body, the child takes it from the mother, which is why when women who are living a nutrient deficient diet, especially a vegan one, they can't continue to produce healthy children.
Right.
They may get a healthy child the first time, maybe two, depending on what their whole background is. But you have to understand that child is taking directly from mother's body.
Right. They draw it out of the bones, and they draw it out of the liver, and they draw it out of the...
They do. Babies are not vegan. So, and
you're experienced in that, mother of 9.
Yes. 9
I had to
children.
bring that up. She has it in her email address.
Yes, mother hen of 9.
Yeah, mother hen
It used
of
to
9.
be mother hen, but then I changed carriers and mother hen wasn't available.
Just want to mention that. So, but anyway, there is a lot of these diets, and I think that if we just realize we go back, to look at history. It seems like we never learn anything from history, do we? We have to repeat it, but we don't do that. I go back to your teeth and these things that I've gleaned from these conferences with Dr. Zunka. The mouth is the what do you say? Your health is determined by your mouth, or whatever it is, because that's kind of like the input of everything. And when you talk about if you have a parent that you've ever had to put braces on your children, one of the reasons is because of this narrowing of your mouth, and that they have to stretch your mouth back up, and you learn things about how your tongue is, where it's supposed to be, and breathing and snoring and all these things are all geared around
related to that
structure of the mouth.
It's so important. And Dr. Zunka is one of the few dentists that we recommend. As a chapter leader, I maintain a chapter resource list to connect. The second part of our mission is to connect consumers with farmers and producers of good food, and also we've expanded to practitioners. And he's
well, you talk about the natural foods, and of course we don't grow our own food. Luckily, we are in a part of the country where there are a lot of farms and things like that. But one of the things that seems to be coming up is this raw milk.
Yes.
And I know you're a proponent of that. But again, some states there's laws against this and that, and some states allow it, some states don't allow it. There's certain things you need to do. But why don't you touch on that? Because I know you really think that's where we're getting a lot of our nutrients from.
It's an important nutrient-rich food. And let me start by correcting the myth that, and I heard this just the other day when I was giving a presentation at an event. Someone said...
A lot of myths.
There are a lot of myths. Someone said, there was, I mentioned milk somewhere, and she said, well, humans are the only species who consume other species' milk. Humans should not be consuming dairy past breast milk. And I beg to differ. Humans are the only ones who build houses, drive cars, wear clothes, use computers. We do a lot of things that other animals don't do.
Exactly.
Because God gave us a brain, the know-how. I actually believe that humans have been consuming milk. There's lots of archaeological evidence for this, as in like residue, casein proteins on pottery shards from thousands of years ago. But also, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, what did Abel raise? He raised sheep and goats, right? They weren't eating meat yet.
Right.
So what were they doing with the sheep and goats? They were probably milking the sheep and goats.
I would think so.
Yeah, as far back as we can see in other cultures, muskox and water buffalo, which are wonderful. One of my favorite yogurt is Annabelle. It's water buffalo yogurt, very high in fat-soluble nutrients because it's high in fat.
Fat is one of those words that, we need fat.
We need it, and our bodies don't store it.
Right.
What do you burn mean? It. We store carbohydrates. We do store carbohydrates, but fat is difficult for the body to store. But the body does burn fat. The heart, for example. Our heart requires fat for fuel.
Is that why bacon tastes so good?
Oh, man. We always like to say if bacon grew on trees, I could be a vegetarian.
We digress. Go on back to the milk.
Butter was framed. Yes.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of evidence showing people have always consumed milk in most cultures. Not every culture had it. Dr. Price visited many, many cultures around the world. Most of them consumed dairy. Now, the Eskimos did not have a whey. The Aboriginals in Australia did not have cattle or goats, but most other cultures did. So they milked the animals. Of course, the animals were naturally grazing, not on soybeans and genetically modified corn, but eating grasses. That's what those mammals are supposed to eat. They're supposed to graze, and they do a super efficient job. Another fallacy is that cattle and animal food production destroys the earth and the climate, and that's completely wrong. The way that it's done today commonly, yes, very detrimental to the environment and to the animal and human health, definitely. But done naturally, the way that animals were designed and the ecosystems were designed, rotationally grazing. If you notice cattle or species such as water buffalo or wildebeest in the wild, they're constantly
moving, right?
They don't stay on one patch. They
that's
constantly
what you talked
move.
about. How our poultry industries. In the past, chickens weren't raised 75,000 chickens in an acre.
No.
They were scattered over thousands of acres. In people's individual farms. So you really were able to.
Or in your backyard.
Or in your backyard. So you don't have that concentration of that manure like we have now. And you wonder, well, we have a problem. Well, think about how we got there.
We got there
not saying
by
that's
thinking
the answer, but the idea is we do have a concentration of things in pockets around our country. They say a certain percentage of our food is grown on just a very small percentage of our land.
And that's true. But if we go back to the way God designed things to work, or nature, I believe in God, so I'll just... Even if you want to believe in evolution, you have to see that things didn't work the way that... I think that we're playing God, actually, quite literally, with modern agriculture and many other things, but especially with modern agriculture and modern medicine and such. We're playing God in that we're trying to reinvent the way that we do things, thinking we know better, we can do better. But in fact, what's happened is we've made everything worse. So we need to go back to the way things used to be. And with milk, as with other foods, people consumed raw milk. They made cheese with it, yogurt, skyr, quark, a wide variety of fermented and cultured dairy, which is very much more digestible and full of microbes and the good things that our bodies need, but not pasteurized. When you pasteurize the milk, it destroys all of the enzyme, lipase, protease, lactase. So
it kills the bad stuff, but it also kills the good stuff.
It kills all the good stuff. And with raw milk that has been produced naturally on a clean farm with rotational grazing, there should not be microbes. And a friend of mine out in California, Mark McAfee, has actually experimented with inoculating fresh raw milk with pathogenic bacteria and taking bacterial counts, and after 24 hours it's gone because the lactoferrins in milk destroy pathogens. But the lactoferrins are destroyed by pasteurization. So you can pasteurize milk, it makes it totally dead, And it actually will allow milk to grow pathogens because the naturally protective factors have been destroyed. So we go back to fresh raw milk. Here in Virginia, we have herd shares. Weston A. Price Foundation has fought very hard for 20 years to make raw milk available across the nation. We now have 43 out of 50 states that allow it in some shape or form. Mostly, in many states, it's just you can go to the farm and buy it. Some, like Pennsylvania, you can even go to the store and buy it. Here in Virginia, we have to have a herd share. My family, of course, I think you know, used to grow most of our own food, and I milked a cow, just a single cow, for many years, and my kids grew up learning where their food came from and helping to produce it, which was a wonderful thing. Here I have a herd share. We have several options, and
so you're not milking the cow yourself anymore, right?
Not anymore, no, but I own part of that cow. So I can drink the milk. Yeah, I can drink the milk. And
so that's how the law works, as long as you're an owner?
As long as you're an owner of at least part of the farm or part of the cow. It works a little differently in some states. Of course, I lived in Pennsylvania for 30 plus years, and there those farmers fought really hard to have free access to raw milk. They didn't want the government on their farm. I witnessed 3 separate farm raids when the FDA and the state Department of Agriculture came in raiding Amish farms, peaceful Amish.
They seem to be a healthy bunch.
Most of them are, but they were definitely declining, really, really badly declining even 20 years ago. But they learned about the research of Dr. Price, and many of them started to convert their diets and their farms. And now many of them supply many people all over the country with fresh raw milk and other products as well, and their health has turned back around.
Let's talk about cholesterol, because that's another thing that, the body needs cholesterol,
yes.
But it seems like we're all being treated for high cholesterol. So
yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, you're right that the body needs cholesterol. Every cell in our body requires cholesterol. It's part of the makeup of the cell wall. It's the base of every hormone in our body. It has many functions. And it's so important that our body is designed to produce cholesterol when we're not getting enough from our diet. We can produce cholesterol on a limited basis from saturated fat and exposure to UVB rays directly on the skin. However, those rays are actually very hard to get. In the summertime here in Virginia, if you're outside between maybe 10 and 2 o'clock in the summer, you can get plenty of UVB rays. However, in winter, not at all. In the morning and the afternoon, very, very little. And then other parts of the world have few to none. So we really need to get our cholesterol and our vitamin D and all of these things from the animal foods that people have traditionally consumed. So, but our liver can synthesize cholesterol from saturated fat. Our skin synthesizes vitamin D from cholesterol. So, when we take a statin drug, for instance, under the guise that we have too much cholesterol, our cholesterol levels are too high, we're actually stifling the body's natural function. And you have to understand too that the body will produce more in times of stress, for stress hormones. It will produce more when we're healing from something. So our cholesterol levels can vary greatly from day to day or week to week. And then we talk about high versus low density cholesterol. Well, our liver is constantly recycling cholesterol, and that's why we have high, which is like fresh, and low, that is going back to the liver for reprocessing. And low density cholesterol is always called the bad cholesterol, but really it's just needing to go back and be recycled. However, with a modern diet, and especially with the use of processed vegetable oils and hydrogenated fats, we now find that we have 2 low-density cholesterols where there was previously no distinction. But now we have this form of low-density cholesterol that is coming from a diet that's high in processed vegetable oils, fried foods from I don't care if it's Spelunkers or McDonald's. You fry those potatoes in vegetable oil, and that oil is used multiple times, maybe changed once a week, and you're producing chemicals that are very harmful to the body,
right.
cause cancer, and they cause the low-density cholesterol globules to glob together. So they clog the veins. That clogs the veins, whereas healthy low-density cholesterol does not clog the arteries. Also, if you look at clogged arteries, yes, there is some cholesterol there, but it's there for two purposes. One is because you've got that low-density sticky stuff that doesn't move, and that's unnatural.
Speaking of moving, because we're not moving like we used to.
Oh, absolutely.
When we were out plowing 40 acres every day, we really didn't have a cholesterol problem, I don't think.
No, we didn't. We didn't have a lot of other problems either. And I love to read about that. Little Britches, I'll just put the plug in for it. It's my favorite series to read to the children, and we've read it twice.
Well, and I see where, like I said, a lot of our lifestyle and our diets, we've tried to correct some of our lifestyle with diets, and vice versa. So coming up here in a couple weeks, you're having a conference up in Winchester.
Yes.
So where we want to find out more about this information. So tell us a little bit about your conference here, and then what are we going to learn if we come there?
Well, the conference it's actually 2 seminars by our president of the Weston A. Price Foundation, Sally Fallon Morell. She and about, I think, 8 other people formed the Weston A. Price Foundation now 20 years ago. And, of course, as we talked earlier, the purpose of the foundation is to teach. Dr. Price's dying words were, you teach, you teach, you teach. So this is what we're doing. Sally will come and she'll talk first in the morning about traditional diets and the principles of traditional diets that we can use today. And then in the afternoon, she's teaching on the oiling of America, which is how we've changed the fats that we eat, and that the modern fats now cause harm, whereas the old-fashioned traditional fats build health instead of harming our health. And there will also be a question and answer period with Sally at the end of the day. The doors open at 8 a.m. We will have vendors, farmers, exhibits. We will be serving a nutrient-dense lunch that I'm in charge of. I'll be.
It'll be good. It'll be interesting too. So where's this all taking place at?
It's at 550 Fairmont Avenue, which is the White House Foods Training Center.
Oh, okay. So that's like on the north side of town.
I believe so. I'm not geographically literate when it comes to Winchester.
I don't recognize Fairmont Avenue, but I do recognize the White House brand name anyway.
So that's where it is.
So Google that, right?
Yep, it's easy to find. It's a nice facility. We'll have childcare available. Our farmers will be bringing foods like chicken and cheeses and butter and all kinds of things that will be available for purchase. You'll be able to meet the farmers, and also we're inviting practitioners to come and exhibit.
It sounds interesting. Is there a cost for this?
The tickets for adults are $35 in advance, $40 at the door. We have discounted rates for children, and all of that information will be posted. You can go to our Facebook page, which is Northern Shenandoah Valley WAPF on Facebook.
I'll put all these links in the story, then people can click on that.
Yeah, it'll be easy.
Well, it sounds like it's really going to be an interesting event.
Yeah,
I know you do travel around doing these things, and very interesting. And I can tell when we have fellowship dinner at church, Maureen and I go to the same church here in town, and we have our fellowship dinners once a month, and she brings some interesting nutrient-dense diets with her.
And usually people,
and they all eat it.
Some people go, ooh, no, that's healthy. And then other people don't know, and they eat it. Wow, this is good.
Let's talk real quick about one thing, and I read a meme on Facebook somewhere that said, what's all this gluten? We've been eating bread for 10,000 years. Now all of a sudden we have gluten problems. It sounds like it's really maybe part of our diet that has really maybe brought this to... And then again, most people that say they have a gluten problem really isn't the gluten at all.
Well, it's probably actually more than just gluten.
Right.
We've really caused a lot of damage to our guts. And when your gut is damaged, our bodies just can't handle gluten and many other things, proteins and dairy, and things in many other natural foods. But the biggest problem with gluten, I believe, is that we are now consuming fast breads, made from genetically modified grains that are very heavily sprayed with glyphosate and other chemicals. And that causes damage. But also, in times past, people didn't make bread in an hour or two.
Exactly.
So grains were weathered in the field, and then when they were made into breads of various kinds or porridges, they were put through a long process in which they were exposed to warmth and time primarily. And that combination breaks down certain anti-nutrients in foods that are harmful to our gut and limit the digestibility of those grains. So now we grow genetically modified grains. We spray them heavily with chemicals, as we have for many years now.
We want a higher yield. That's what we want.
We want a higher yield. It actually doesn't work that way. Traditional ways of growing things actually work better. And then we harvest them and we store them in silos where they collect mold. And then we process them into flour where we take the nutrients out, sell them to vitamin companies and livestock companies for part of their feed. And then we add some genetically modified yeast, mix it up, and an hour later we have a loaf of bread, which is toxic and which has not had the proper time and proper environment to be able to break down the anti-nutrients that cause damage.
I tell you, I read something, again, part of my useless information that I get is, the smell you have when you have fresh baked bread, how so good that is.
Yes.
Someone told me that was a toxic smell. If you had too much of that, it'd be harmful to you. I never heard of such a thing.
I haven't either.
It always smells so good, though. Something else that you talk about our diet. Think about what happened and you talk about the Polynesian, and we know that they have a long life span. And in Hawaii, one of our states is probably the highest for some people there that have maintained that Oriental type diets, the natural diets. But when they introduce Spam, that's like more Spam. They have every flavor under the sun, but it's like only sold in Hawaii. So, speaking of fat, and that has changed their diet based upon that, because again,
their
health has changed drastically.
Now, if you had pasture-raised organic Spam, you'd be fine.
Right.
But
they probably have that somewhere.
I have never seen it, but I would like to. That would actually be a good, inexpensive food. But toxins are stored in the fat.
Right.
So when you're talking about conventionally raised meats and dairy, there are toxins stored in that fat. So you don't want that. You definitely don't want that. But we believe in, again, the naturally raised, and we also believe in nose to tail eating. I eat liver fairly often. Too much and it's toxic. Even good liver.
Even too much of a good thing is...
Too much of a good thing is definitely not a good thing.
Well, I've heard somewhere, we are what we eat.
And we are what we eats.
That's right.
That's what's super important, and people need to understand that. I've been saying that for years, and recently I've started to hear other people say it. So, yeah.
Well, we know, and what's really, it's the way we are. We know these things are the correct way to do it, but we just don't do it.
We just don't do it.
Right.
But more and more people are. Some of the things that we've promoted, like the raw dairy, but also bone broth, fermented foods like fermented sauerkraut and pickles and kimchi and those kinds of things. We've been teaching that for years, and they've really been making a comeback in recent years. For instance, I was at a Mother Earth News Fair in Maryland last weekend, and there were two different companies there. One of them is really my favorite, and they both produce fermented foods.
Right.
And then things like kombucha and ginger beer. We've been promoting that for many years. They're a great alternative
Ginger
to
beer
soda.
is non-alcoholic, by the way.
It is non-alcoholic, yes. And it tastes delicious. And Sweet Farms out of Frederick, Maryland, who will be at our event and are contributing to the lunch.
That's great.
They produce a wonderful
Well,
ginger
it
beer.
sounds like that we need to get more information on this and your event that you're having on June 22nd.
June 22nd.
At the White House Training Center, 550 Fairmont Avenue in Winchester. They'll be able to find out everything you need to know about the Weston A. Price Foundation and nutrient-rich diets. Is that
right, or nutrient dense.
Dense, not rich.
It means the same thing.
It means
it's
the same thing. All right, Maureen, I really appreciate you stopping by, talking to us, and you're welcome to come back anytime. All right?
Thank you.
Thanks
I'd
a lot.
love to.
We really enjoy it.
Thank you.